Starting last is hard because all that needs to be said has been said. So I take a different perspective. Grace, the financial expertise came before. I think Donovan and Mr. Wright spoke amazingly well about that. And the we partnership in education is what I think has been missing from the conversation for the last decade or two. So I'm old enough to have gone to high school in the height of when things were free, and there was a long-standing development fund at Cornell College, a government school, that everybody accepted needed to be paid, even though the bulk of education was free, because parents understood that $20 a term, which had value, actually meant the difference between just going into a classroom or getting what was deemed to be a Cornell College education. I think one of the issues we have is that we need some common understandings that we don't have around education when we hear different conversations. So, what is the crisis that we face? I think is one that needs a common understanding. I've jotted down some things here, but I think if we get the next 2 points, a consensus around them, other things follow. We are no longer attracting in enough numbers the best and brightest to education. Education is about service. And you'll hear me speak passionately about this because I come from what I consider to be a family of educators. Maybe that's why I ended up at the business school, but that's more accidental than deliberate. Because after my parents' generation, that chain was broken. So I grew up hearing my parents talking about that my family runs on the basis of a clan. If your parents are cousins, your cousins, and your children are cousins, which sets family in perpetuity, which is another story. But what that meant was that role models and support came from all across this family structure. So 3 generations ago, it was the few that had education that inspired the other family members who were peasant farmers or laborers to send their children, who then became teachers. So there's a tradition. Why did it break with my generation? Because we saw a stark decline in the financial well-being of our parents. Donovan, you mentioned 43,000, and I said that's serendipity. My mother, after 33 and a half years as a principal in our retired, is getting a pension of $43,000 after much heralded adjustments. We couldn't understand why she resisted us getting a helper, full-time helper for her, because we would pay. And I remember several years ago she exploded and said, so I am now supposed to sign over my entire pension to a helper. How do I live? And that's a stark reality, because that's a value we have paid on a generation of teachers, mainly women, some of whom remain single because they devoted their lives to teaching, who a lot of us as their former students or colleagues maintain quietly and hopefully with a little dignity, with a well-placed envelope with whoever it is appropriate. So, and I think that's the first thing, because if we don't have a quality education, we're not going anywhere. Right? I was lucky enough through my high school time first at Cornell College and in a Wilmer's Boys School to be taught by a lot of teachers who had bachelors and masters, which weren't exactly common as they were now, but that was what we attracted. And I'm spending some time on this as part of the funding, that not everything is money. I don't earn my full economic potential now because I'm able to balance between purpose in life and being able to afford it. But when that equation shifts, that's when the siren call of migration comes and we lose our people. The second crisis we have is that we're graduating students on a conveyor belt system through the education system. So that a child leaving fifth form, it's more telling us in general rather than in the breach, that you have just spent 5 years at school rather than you have achieved along the grade levels. And that has some serious knock-on effects. I also have an issue with CXC, how it certifies. Good students get good grades, but I'm telling you, I'm struggling to read even email notes of students who have had good K passes at English and have been let into university. So some of these are uncomfortable conversations, but we must have them. We're not preparing our students for globalization because they don't know English. Let me pause. I used to work at a company called Cable and Wireless when they were the sole arbiters of BPOs, we call them now. The big attraction of Jamaica, other than geographic location, time zone, and good telecoms, was that we had a good core of people who could speak, write, and understand English. The BPOs are now turning away 7 in 10 applicants solely because they have no mastery in English. So I'm happy to have the debate about whether teaching in Patois or English, but my engineer's logic tell me if 50 years ago, when there were less educational opportunities, we were able to teach students English by immersion. I remember I tell you I'm a teacher quick, right? So what used to happen? We all used to run up and down outside, speak Patois, but when you got into the classroom, it had to be English because you learned English by immersion. And interestingly, we never knew about learning language by immersion, but that's what we did. So some of the things that we have thrown out of our education system, I positively have to revisit them, because teaching in Patois is a massive undertaking. It is about standardizing Patois. I had the fortune to grow up in 3 rural communities with different flavors of Patois. Shillong, St. James, Westmoreland. When I go to St. Elizabeth, I'm like, okay? So it is desirable, it is our language, you know. My same mother who taught the children by immersion ensured that we learn all of the dialect points, because she said you have to know your language and your culture, but we have to talk about appropriateness and reality about how we move the dialects as a country. Poor infrastructure, I know I'll come to some funding. I spoke in one of my rare public occasions a few months ago about we need to think differently about what we collect for NHD ministry. We have crumbling infrastructure. I went to Cornell College and sat in some classrooms that were 30 years old, and some 30 enough years later, those classrooms are still there, unable to be. Everybody who is on the PAYE and who is an employer contributes to NHT. The reality is very few people will get a house because we have a house already, or there's a dynamics of that. But most people consume certain pieces of public infrastructure. So whether it's hospitals, schools, and since we're talking about schools now, what if we had a program which said, let's go through the schools and guarantee that every school has some minimal public infrastructure. Our economy is growing, Minister, but let's continue to take $11 billion a year from the ministry. But how about increasing over time? We pump that into that sort of infrastructure, which is critical for the well-being and the development, because having healthy population, having a well-educated population leads us to a prosperous population. We have a situation where we have too few good schools anymore. And here's where I may take some issue with the Patterson report, adding a lot of things about what constitutes a good school. I'm a new native parent going to high school. I know what a good high school is. I know it through several things. I know it through my interactions with graduates, on the workplace, social interactions, reputation, classes. Too many of our good high schools have been ruined. Too many of our good high schools have been ruined. I won't call any names, but when I was going to high school, for example in Kingston, there were at least 4 or 5 boys' schools that were on equal footing. Now, there's only one that everybody is fighting to get into as a boys' school, which is Woolmer's. And the rest, some are on the way back, but they used to be all at the same level. It didn't matter where you go. The same thing for the all-girls schools or the co-ed schools. I go to the country. And I called a name, I went to Cornwall College. It's nowhere near what it should be. And alumni may be fighting to get it back, but it's a matter of what's learn or leave. Very simple, direct, straightforward. It was in Latin, so it didn't come across. This K or this K, but that's reality. And we have renamed schools as high schools. Donald Trump has a thing that these people are rhinos, Republicans in name only. We have a lot of hinos. High school in names only. Right? Minister Place, the renaming of the junior secondary schools springs to mind. So, and then the other, suppose I think are the common things of crisis. Then we have to have a common understanding of what constitutes education. We complain about the soft skills, the ability of our graduates at whatever level to communicate, to behave, to have a common understanding of society. If we agree that the parental unit is coming under stress and the church doesn't have as maybe overarching a role as we have, then a lot of what I learned also came from school. The sports you played, the clubs you were in, the fact that teachers were allowed to tell you how to behave. And that's another can of worms about how much control you have over the classroom, and that's a debate. But the truth is, I couldn't dare have taken, even if a teacher hit me, I couldn't have dared lifted my hand back to them and remain in school. I'd be lucky to get away with a suspension. I'm not advocating for teachers to hit anybody, but there is a slippage in terms of those sort of things, and then it plays out in the workplace and in our society. So, I think once we go on this, then we'll have a thing is, what is the $83,000 supposed to do? What are the deficiencies? Where are we to go with teacher remuneration? And most clearly, who pays? Now, UWI was free education for a long time, and some of these things take time. But now everybody accepts that the government contributes so much. The UWI to its activities raises another percentage, and students are notionally responsible for 20% of the tuition fee. And there are some edges, but Minister, it is a model that works, and nobody complains bitterly about the fact that I may have to take a student council, or I may have to look to the community. So I think that education, both at primary and secondary level, we have to get back to the partnership and insist about paying to students. Principal Wright, we spoke about the $25,000 shoe. We left out the $15,000 watch and the $20,000 hairdo for the children. We are perfectly happy to talk about how important entertainment is and how much it is a pillar. But we somehow seem to think that the same people who have to buy a different outfit to go to every entertainment event and spend how much money with the additional fixings, all of a sudden they are now too poor to make that sacrifice. And that's what we have gotten away from the previous generation or two. The idea that a good education with some help created some sacrifice. Trust and church schools, ecumenical people, they have to become more assertive. If I run a trust school and I do it, I tell you what I do for the academic year, 23-24 minister. I'm not fomenting revolution. But I would simply say this is what it costs to educate a student according to our standards, and invite the government to say that we are allocating so many spaces for you, and here is what we will do, and this is what we expect the government to do, because the churches and trusts have receded from where they were. You look at the schools that were formed and our flagship schools. A lot of times they were not funded at all by the public purse. They were funded out of the generosity of churches who built these schools, staffed these schools, to special offerings to put together these schools, sometimes foregoing building huge edifices for themselves as religious bodies. So again, I think we need to go back to those partnerships. I can't tell the last day I've heard about a large number of high schools or primary schools being built by the religious community. There have been some, but not nearly enough. And those who have built already have not been building much more. So again, and that came from partnership with parents, because the way you got your money was through collections, right, Archbishop? Let me finish quickly. We have used education and education funding as a political football. So let us stop the pretense that parents can't pay or that the government is the sole thing, right? So I'll end here that we need to put at the policy level the equal emphasis on quality as well as quantity of students to again get that conversation going. Thank you very much.